Sailrite has dug back into our archives and found this video that may be helpful for past owners of the Sailrite Sailmaker Sewing Machine. Since the video is from 2001, the quality will be very poor.
My name is Matt Grant, and I'm in charge of quality control of all Sailrite sewing machines. You have purchased our flagship sewing machine, the Sailrite Sailmaker. This sewing machine is a very high quality piece of equipment that is designed to be used hard and for a very, very long period of time. The quality and workmanship of the machine is excellent, and to protect that in shipping, we've gone to great lengths to package your machine properly so that we will have no shipping damage issues. The machine comes in two boxes. One box contains the case, and wrapped inside the bottom of the case are all of the accessories that come with the machine. The other box holds the head of the sewing machine, which is the cast iron or the metal part of your sewing machine. We recommend that you at least keep the box that the sewing machine head comes in, and that head is carefully placed inside of a special piece of molded styrofoam. There are obviously two sides to this, and it's probably a good idea to hang on to this if you ever need to ship the sewing machine anywhere. These are very nice to have. It should be pointed out, if you ever do ship your machine anywhere, whether you're moving to another state or taking off to go to your boat, you do not want to ship it inside the case. These machines are very heavy, and putting the machine in the case and trying to ship it as one package is not a wise thing to do. Always separate the two components as we have done, and then carefully package them. This is the sewing machine case for the Sailrite Sailmaker, and I have removed all of the accessories from the inside of the case and left what's attached to the case. And basically what we have is we have a foot control. We have the plug for the machine, which is a ground fault circuit interrupt, and anytime you plug the machine in, you are required to depress the top button in order to make the plug functional. You can test it with the test button here. Anytime you unplug it and then plug it back in again, you always have to press this top button in order to make the machine functional. Motor is wired permanently into the case, so it is not attached to the sewing machine at this time. And same thing with the light. And down inside the bottom of the box, there is a block that has two outlets on it. There will be plugs in those outlets already. One of the outlets is labeled light, and the other one is labeled motor. The light must be plugged into the light side, and the motor goes to the motor side. If you were to reverse them, the motor would run constantly, and the light would only work when you press on the foot control. So be careful to plug those into the right spots if you ever unplug them. Also, I want to point out at the very back of the case there are two hinge pins. And these are the pins that go into the back side of the sewing machine, and that's basically all there is to installing the machine in the case. And then of course you would attach the motor to the back side of the sewing machine with two set screws that are installed in the back of the machine, and the light would go on to the machine. There's a bracket at the back side of the sewing machine that this slips into. When you're putting the machine in the case, it's best to grab it as I have here, one arm under the body of the machine and the other under the arm. And it's a good idea to have a helper. In this case, Bill's holding the right hinge up. First thing I'm going to do is start the left hinge, and then he holds the right hinge up and helps me to get it into the hole on the back side of the machine, and slip it all the way back, and now we can set the machine down in the cutout. Now, once the machine's in place, I've already removed the two set screws from the back side of the machine. Now we can install the motor. And Bill, if you'd give me a flathead screwdriver, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm going to start with the top screw, but it really doesn't matter where you start. Find the hole and screw this one in so that it's fairly far in. And now we should start the bottom one. I'm going to put it into the slot of the motor bracket and use my screwdriver to help me guide it in. Now the top screw should be fairly tight. The bottom screw just has to be snug. So I'm going to position it fairly far up in its mounting position, but the Sailmaker's almost to the top of its positioning is the proper setting for the belt that comes with the machine. With the motor installed, now we need to put the belt on. But before you put the belt on, you want to remove the thread from the eye of the needle. Otherwise, when we're turning the flywheel to put the belt on, we could create a thread jam down below. To put the belt on, first move the belt all the way to the inside of the flywheel, then put it on the motor pulley, and then start it in the teeth and gently roll the flywheel toward you. You want about 1/4 of an inch in slack in the belt when you push on the belt here. If you don't have that, you need to loosen your screws and raise the motor. If the belt is too sloppy, you need to lower the motor in order to snug things up. Also, the light should be installed at this point, and simply slide the light into the bracket, and then you can install a standard household light bulb up to 40 watts. Once you put the light in place or the light bulb in, you snap the blue cover in place and your light is ready to go. Once you've unpacked the parts from the case for your Sailmaker sewing machine, you should find that you have the components shown here. Now we'll discuss each of those parts briefly so you know what they're used for. You'll receive some parts in a bag which are for power stand use of the sewing machine. Those should be set aside at this point because they cannot be used for portable operation. What they are is a series of shafts, a knee pad, and some cast clamps. And if you were ever to install your machine in a power stand, you would use these components as the knee lift operation so that you could use your knee to lift and lower the presser foot instead of using the lever on the back side of the machine to lift and lower the presser foot. You'll also have a small diameter flywheel, and this flywheel is the standard flywheel that should be used again if you ever go to a power stand setup. Your machine is shipped with the large diameter flywheel, which is to be used in portable configuration and gives you the hand cranking control. We send a lot of different needle sizes and packages with the Sailrite Sailmaker sewing machine. The normal size for canvas work that you should use would be an 18, but for further information on needle size to fabric and thread weight, refer to your written guidebook. You'll also have extra bobbins, a maintenance brush used for cleaning out any thread, debris, or dust in the bottom side of the machine. Seam ripper for ripping stitches, should you need to remove any for replacement or just for tear apart and restitching, patterning, etc. Oil for lubricating the machine. And this machine should use a light lubricant. You don't want to use kerosene-based oils because kerosene will evaporate too quickly. These two devices are spool cushions, and what they're designed for is for home sewing. So these would cap the top and the bottom of the thread like so for pulling the thread off of the side of the cone. Here's your hand crank with shoulder bolt for hand cranking with the Monster 2 flywheel, which is installed on the machine as it arrives. Light beehive spring, light presser foot spring. We discussed the use of the lighter springs when sewing with light fabrics or with lighter threads in order to reduce puckering of the fabric and to reduce any marring of the material if there's too much pressure on the presser foot. And that's obviously when you're dealing with delicate materials. We ship the machine with the heavier springs in place. They also receive a number of Allen wrenches that are used for different things. The largest Allen wrench is used for installing the hand crank to the flywheel. The middle-sized Allen wrench is used for tightening the set screws in the flywheel to lock it onto the upper shaft. And this very small Allen wrench is used for adjusting the position of the pulley on the motor shaft. Over here, we're showing the accessories that are used for different types of sewing and different types of material. The Sailmaker is a very unique machine from the standpoint that it's extremely versatile. You can sew light materials, for instance, do tailor work and home sewing, or you can sew heavy materials like canvas and sailcloth. We ship the machine with the 12 millimeter wide, and that refers to the width of the slot that the needle enters. The 12 millimeter wide throat plate, feed dog, and presser foot in place. This is the assembly that you want to use for most projects, and probably should always try it first if it's installed to see if it works for your application. If it doesn't work, then you have several options. Let's talk about straight stitching first. This is a straight stitch plate, straight stitch feed dog. We'll show how those are installed later. This is a straight stitch foot then, and if you were doing only straight stitching, those would be the appropriate components to switch to. Obviously, the narrower foot makes straight stitching easier in some applications. If you needed to get very close to a zipper, or for roping installation, you would use the right roping zipper foot. And what that does is the needle then would enter the foot on the right side here. Makes it a lot easier to get very close to whatever you're sewing next to. If you had a project where the material was very sticky, this is a roller presser foot, and it rolls right along the surface of the top of the material. With sticky materials like plastipane or vinyl, the standard foot, which has just a flat bottom to it, can stick to the surface of the material, inhibiting the machine's ability to pull the material through. The roller foot is designed to reduce friction and as a result produce proper length stitches. Here we have the 5 millimeter needle plate, 5 millimeter feed dog, and the 5 millimeter presser foot. These components should look very similar in size to what you would find on a home sewing machine. The reason you might want to switch to a smaller foot for home sewing is that the gaps between the cutout in the needle plate and the tooth of the feed dog are significantly smaller, so it reduces the possibility of the dogs catching the material and snagging it in the cutouts of the throat plate. But also, when you're sewing home fabrics, you generally don't want a foot that's so wide that makes it difficult to see where you're sewing. And that's why we include the 5 millimeter assemblies with this machine. This is a handkerchief hemmer, and in sail making and canvas it's of no use whatsoever, but we send it with the machine. This particular foot is a left and right zipper foot. There is a cutout on both the left and the right side of the foot, and by adjusting this thumb screw you can move the foot to either side of the needle. It's an okay foot, but it's not nearly as good a quality as the single task right zipper foot. The machine does not come with the left, but there is a left available. Use this cautiously. Sometimes it will work well and sometimes not. If you need a really good left zipper foot, you need to order one of those separately. Now, moving right along, several tools come with the machine, screwdrivers and a wrench for various adjustments that may need to be performed down the road. Cone of thread comes with your machine. A flexible or an articulating neck light comes with your machine so that you can position the light where you would like to have it give you a better visual of what you're sewing. The light attaches, it slips into a bracket. This assembly slips into a bracket on the back side of the machine, which is pre-installed. And the only other things we have here would be the packet of instructions that come with the machine. We include the factory instructions on the machine, plus Sailrite has written our own instruction booklet that covers things in much greater detail. The larger book is the one that you want to pay the most attention to, as it is the book that will give you the most help. The machine also comes with a dust cover. Oh, one more thing. Oil pan. I should have mentioned this before. The oil pan goes with the knee lift mechanism, and basically when you install a sewing machine in a power stand, the bottom of the machine is completely open. That's why you can use the knee lift mechanism, and if you don't want oil dripping on your lap, so this would go in the cutout to keep that from happening. Again, not something you could ever use in portable setup. Set it aside. We took the thread out of the needle to put the belt on the flywheel, but we still probably have our little piece of paper under here that tells you that we've checked the machine out carefully. To remove the paper, lift the presser foot, and there's a lever here on the back side underneath the machine that you can lift and lower in order to move the presser foot up and down. And simply pull the material or the paper out and set it aside. Now, notice that the machine is threaded as we have sent it to you. That's a guide for you to see how to properly thread the machine. I'm going to pull that thread out, and we're going to just go ahead and thread it on the video here so that you can see exactly how it's done. Notice that the Sailmaker has an integral thread stand built into it. You just swing the arm up, put your cone of thread onto the spool pin on the back side, and then lead your thread up to the eyelet in the thread stand. Now we come to the three-holed ear, and we're going to go down through the first hole, up and around to the last hole, and down through that hole. That device acts as sort of a thread dekinker. Any kinks in the thread will be minimized or eliminated by that twisting of the thread through those holes. If you have a batch of thread that twists very badly, you might need to go through all three holes. Next we go through the paper clip, and then we go down into the tension assembly. Now with the presser foot down, the tension assembly is closed. With the presser foot up, you'll see those discs come apart, and these are the discs that look like sort of butterfly wings at the ends. In other words, they flare out from one another. We need to pull the thread deeply between those discs, all the way up, under, and onto the left side. And then we're going to catch a little take-up spring here. And I can use my finger just to move that spring. And I've got the thread in the elbow of that spring. And then I go under this arm. And then we're going to go back through the paper clip to go back up. Oops. And now we go through the take-up arm. And we go through the take-up arm from the right side through to the left side. Now we go back through the paper clip guide again. Then there is another thread guide down here, which we go through. Whoops. And you clip it under the guides. That's how it works. You don't have to pass things through guides. And then the most difficult guide is there's actually a little guide right up here at the top of the needle. And you go at it from the right side and behind, and then it will clip into that guide. Now, needles on this machine are installed so that the eye of the needle runs front to back. There's a long groove on the front side of the needle, and then on the very back side of the needle there's a little carved out section that's only about 1/8 of an inch tall, and it looks like a little flattened area just above the eye of the needle. That flattened area goes to the back. We insert our thread then from front to back, pull it out, and then through the slit in the foot and underneath the presser foot. Now, before we talk about picking up the lower thread, we're going to talk about winding bobbins. To wind a bobbin, we either need to get a new bobbin out of our parts kit, or we should remove the bobbin case from under the machine and wind thread on the bobbin that's in the bobbin case. This brings up an important point with the sewing machine, and that is, how do I get to the bobbin case? If you've got small hands, you can slide the plate and get into the bobbin case assembly and pull it out. If you're like me, you can't do that. Your hand's too big to get in there effectively. So what I do is I take the cone of thread and I tilt the machine back and carefully support the machine with the cone of thread right on the ledge of the thread stand. Now you want to be very careful about getting your hands in under here, because if this machine falls down on your hand, it's going to hurt. So either hold it with one hand or make sure that your support is low enough that all of the center of effort of the machine is on whatever your support is. To pull the bobbin case out, there is a lever. And this is just like any typical sewing machine. You lift the lever and then you can pull the case out. Now if you're having a hard time pulling the case out, it may mean that your needle is down into the mechanism. If the needle's down there, it's not going to come out. So you may have to rotate your flywheel a little bit so that the needle is removed from that area so you can pull it out. Notice, with me holding the lever, the bobbin stays in place. When I let go of the lever, the bobbin is free to come out. So the lever holds the bobbin captive to the bobbin case. Let's set the bobbin case aside for now. We don't have much thread on this one, so I'm just going to strip the thread off. And now our bobbin is ready for winding. To wind the bobbin, we need to put the machine back down in the case gently. Now, if we had a second cone of thread sitting up top here, we'd run the thread through this eyelet and then down through one of these holes, back to the tensioner and to the bobbin, and we would be winding bobbins while we're sewing. Or winding bobbins with the needle just jumping up and down, but you would again want to remove your thread from the needle, otherwise you'd create a thread jam down below. But since we only have one cone of thread that comes with the machine, I'm going to show you what you would do. You would have to take the thread out of the machine, and then we are going to run it through. Actually, instead of one hole, I'm going to run it through to dekink it, just like we did for threading the machine. And then we go to this tensioner here in the back, and we go around the tensioner one complete time. That tensioner is what applies tension to the thread and will keep the bobbin winding in a tight fashion. Then we take our bobbin, and there's a little keyway in the side of the bobbin. The thread comes through that keyway. Yeah, gotta snake it through there. Okay? And then on the other side, there's a similar keyway that goes onto a key of the post. So you gotta spin the bobbin a little bit until you hit the key, and then you'll feel it lock in. And then you push the lever over to wind the bobbin. So as the bobbin winds, you can either stop and clip this thread, or with lighter thread, you can usually just jerk it off while you're winding the bobbin. But what we do then is just wind the bobbin until it disengages, and when it disengages, it's full. And now we're ready to install the bobbin in the bobbin case. To put the bobbin in the bobbin case, you will hold the bobbin case so that the post of the bobbin case faces you. Put the bobbin in so that the thread is coming off the top and to the right, which means when you pull on the thread, you'll see the bobbin spin clockwise. There is a slit in the side of the bobbin case that you pull the thread down through, and then you'll see a little leaf spring that you pull it under, and it will engage into an exit point of the leaf spring. The Sailmaker machine also has a pigtail spring on the bobbin case. We don't recommend that spring for anything but zigzag stitching. And in most cases, when we're sewing here at the shop, we don't use the pigtail spring at all. To put the bobbin case back in the machine, you would simply hold the bobbin by the lever again. That locks or hold the bobbin case by the lever. That locks the bobbin in place. Needle up again, tilt the machine back, and we put it in this time. Drop it in and make sure that the lever goes all the way down, and then throw the loose thread tail down into the bottom of the case. I've rethreaded the machine. Now I want to show you how to pick up the bobbin thread. We have a tail of thread that comes out of the presser foot. and I'm going to hold that tail of thread with one hand. With the other hand, I'm going to rotate the flywheel until the needle bar goes all the way to the bottom of its travel, and then comes all the way to the top of its travel. Once it reaches the top of its travel, that will be where the take-up arm is at the top of its stroke as well. When I pull on the bobbin or the thread, then what happens is a loop comes up from the bottom side, which is indeed the bobbin thread, and I can simply pull that thread out, place the two threads under the foot of the machine, and the sewing machine is ready to sew. One important note when you pull up the bobbin thread, you always want to make sure that that bobbin thread pulls through freely, because if it doesn't pull through freely, something's jammed down below and you may have to take the bobbin case out and put it back in again in order to make sure that everything is feeding freely. Alright, Sailrite Sailmaker Sewing Machine is very straightforward. The machine is very easy to use, and there are only a few controls that you need to become familiar with. First is the reversing lever. You do not turn the flywheel backwards in order to reverse a sewing machine. In fact, with the rotary hook sewing machine, you want to not turn the machine backward at all if possible. That's why we have rotation stickers on the flywheel showing you which direction to turn the flywheel. This is especially important when you're hand cranking. You don't want to crank the opposite direction. You crank this direction toward you from the top. If you go the opposite direction, it is possible for the thread to get jammed in the race assembly and lock the machine up so that the flywheel will no longer turn over. That's an easy thing to correct if it happens, but we strongly recommend that you call Sailrite and talk to a Sailrite technician so that they can give you some hints on how to do that. If you're in an area where you can't call in, I'll give you a couple hints now. The best thing to do is take all of the thread out of the machine, take the bobbin case out if you can, and oil the hook mechanism liberally. And when I say hook mechanism, I'm just talking about all around the bobbin case. And then make sure that your flywheel is locked on to the upper shaft. There are two set screws under the belt that allow you to lock it on, and then jerk it backward and forward multiple times, and you should be able to chew that thread out of the race, and once it's chewed out, you should be off and set, ready to sew again. If that simple procedure doesn't take care of it, then you really do need to talk to somebody at Sailrite. Alright, and you can turn things backwards. It's just there's one spot where if you turn it backwards and the thread goes too far around the hook, you can have that issue occur. Don't be afraid of the machine though. There's nothing that you can do to it to break it and cause you horrible amounts of trouble. We can fix anything with you over the phone easily. Reverse is by pushing this lever down. The machine will still rotate the same direction, but that throws the feeding mechanism into a reverse form of travel, which will move the material the opposite direction. This dial, which has numbers 1 to 5 on it, is the stitch length dial. At 5, it's sewing in 5 millimeters, and the other numbers represent different millimeter stitch lengths. The best way, when you turn the dial, you'll notice that the reversing lever moves as you turn the dial. And you're working a little bit of resistance in the lever when you do that. The best way to turn it is to center the reversing dial, then you can move it easily to the number that you want and release the reverse when you have it set where you want it. I'm going to move it back to maximum stitch length. This lever controls the width of the zigzag stitch. At 0, we're in straight stitch. All the way down to the bottom, we're at 12 millimeters, and anything in between. To lock the stitch in a particular position, you simply move the lever down where you want it and tighten the thumb screw above the lever. The lever's spring-loaded, so what it will do is it will come up and stop at the thumb screw. If you're sewing, this knob down here is a limiter. Say I'm sewing this zigzag stitch and I don't want to lose the position. I can move this limiter up, lock it in place. Now if I ever go to a narrower zigzag stitch or I go to straight stitch and I want to go back to my previous zigzag stitch, I can push the lever down and it will stop at the limiter. That's all that is. Move it back out of position. And only other thing you want to know is when you're moving this lever, that's moving the needle bar as well. So you don't want the needle in the fabric when you're making these adjustments, otherwise you'll be bending the needle. Okay. Over on the left end of the machine, we have the tension knob from the tension assembly, and we have presser foot tension. And there's a knob up on the top of the machine for the presser foot tension. Presser foot tension is how much spring pressure there is down on the foot. Turning this counterclockwise releases the amount of spring pressure. Indeed, if you turn it counterclockwise far enough, this knob will come out and then the big spring will actually pop out, and you can replace it with a smaller spring that we offer for more delicate fabrics and home sewing. Having it set at about 1 inch above the surface of the casting is what we consider to be normal pressure. The only time that I would really recommend playing with this is if you really need to reduce the tension on the foot to eliminate any puckering that might be occurring with light material. So if you're sewing with spinnaker cloth, for instance, you may notice that you've got some material puckering occurring. You don't need all that pressure. Drop this off a lot and you should notice that the puckering starts to disappear. Tension assembly knob is here, and the tension assembly, this is a fine adjustment tension knob. In other words, you can rotate this knob more than just one rotation. It will rotate multiple rotations. And as a result, sometimes to make an effect to the tension of the stitch, you have to think in terms of turning the knob more than just a fraction of a turn. You may have to turn it 1 or 2 turns, or 3 in some cases, to start to see differences in the stitch tension. Normal setting point would be with the knob basically flush with the end of the post that it threads onto, maybe a little bit further in. So, and that's pretty much the starting point for heavier canvas. For lighter work, you'll be backing this off by turning it counterclockwise. The basics to timing, or I'm sorry, not timing, the basics to thread tension revolve around where the knot is. In other words, you've got a thread on the top and you've got a thread on the bottom, and the thread on the top is looped around the thread on the bottom, creating a knot. And the knot, generally speaking, should be positioned as close to the center of the fabric as possible. If you can see the knots on the bottom of the fabric, you need to turn this clockwise in order to pull the knot into the material. Conversely, if the knot is visible on the top of the fabric, you would need to turn this counterclockwise in order to allow the knot to recede down in toward the bottom of the material. There is tension on the bobbin case from down below. If we remove the bobbin case, you'd see that there's a single set screw that controls the tension on the bobbin case. However, we have set the bobbin case tension the way we feel it should be set from the factory, and what you should feel is something that replicates pretty close to the amount of tension that you would feel if you were pulling dental floss from its container. I missed one thing with regard to an adjustment, or not an adjustment, but a particular component that can be utilized in order to perform a slightly better straight stitch, and that is that with a zigzag machine, the needle bar always has a little bit of play left and right when the machine is in straight stitch, because obviously that bar has to be able to swing left and right. So under the cover, which just simply opens, there is a knob that is a locking device. When you're in straight stitch, lever all the way up over here, it is possible to lock this knob so that there is no play left and right in the needle bar, which will result in slightly straighter stitches. The only caution here is that when you have this locked, you will not be able to move the machine into zigzag. So don't force this lever. If it doesn't move, that means you simply need to release the lock, and then it will move. All right. I'm going to close the cover, and I've got a few layers of Nautilus material here, and we're in straight stitch. And needle was up when I lifted the presser foot to put it under the material, and you can see I've got my foot control up here on the table. Normally it would be on the floor, but I'm not set up properly for sewing here anyway. This is just to show you how to use things. So needles in the fabric, push on the foot control. It is variable speed, so the harder you push the pedal, the faster you're going to go. When I reach the end of the material to turn a corner, I'm going to stop with the needle buried. And you can do this by hand, stop with the needle buried, but don't turn it backwards. Always turn toward you from the top of the flywheel. Needle buried, lift the presser foot. Now I can turn the fabric and drop the presser foot again, and I can continue to sew. And you can see how that works. Now, to go to a zigzag stitch, needle out of the fabric, move the lever to a position where I want it. I'll leave the stitch long in this particular case. Press on the foot control, And now I have a nice long zigzag stitch there. Now, to remove the fabric, I want the take-up arm at the top of its stroke, presser foot up, and then I pull the material out to the left and pull it out so that I have roughly 4 to 6 inches of thread exposed. Snip the threads, and the fabric is removed. Let's talk about locking stitches. Generally, at the beginning of a stitch, you would start by sewing forward for a few inches, reverse, hold the lever down, sew in reverse, and then let it back up and sew back over it again. That is a properly locked stitch. And then at the end of the sewing pass, I would do a similar stitch in order to lock the threads once again. And that would generally be done in either straight stitch or zigzag in order to keep the threads from coming loose. We've talked about sewing and shown a little bit about how the mechanism works. I want to talk about changing out the throat plates and the feed dogs and the presser foot. Presser foot is simply removed by untwisting this thumb screw here, and there's a screwdriver slot to facilitate removing it if it's tight. And then to remove the throat plate, what you would do is tilt your machine back. And again, I'm going to support it on that platform in the back with the cone of thread. And now there is a spring-loaded button right here to the left of the hook assembly. And when you push on that spring-loaded lever, the back of the throat plate pops up. Now what you want to do is you want to do this with the feed dog fairly low in the throat plate, and then you would push the lever and push on the back of the plate in order to slide the plate forward and out. And there it comes. And when it comes out, you'll see there are no screws that hold this in place. There are a couple of spring clips on the front, and then there's a key on the back that goes into a spot in the casting. Once the needle plate is removed, then you would remove the feed dog. One of the very nice things about this machine is there are no small set screws to be removed and lost. Instead, there are large slotted heads on the bottom here, 2 of them, to remove the feed dog, and you simply loosen these, don't remove them, and then you can slide the feed dog out that direction, and you're ready to install a new one, put a new throat plate on, if you want to go to straight stitch, for instance, or 5mm, and then put the appropriate foot on. That's all there is to replacing the throat plate, feed dog, and presser foot assembly. Now let's move on to oiling. Oiling the machine is simply a matter of, there are a bunch of holes in the casting. Just putting a drop of oil in each of those holes, and there are no electronics inside. This is just a mechanical piece of equipment, which means that there isn't anything you can oil that will cause any problems. And on the bed of the machine there are a number of oil spots. When you open this left end cover, you'll find some in here. You want to get some oil on any of the vertical shafts. That means the needle bar and the presser foot bar. And if you rotate the machine over, you can see where there are any parts that are metal to metal that are working on one another, and get some oil on those components. On the underside of the machine, I can get my prop. On the underside of the machine, again, you'll see oil holes. Put oil in any of the oil holes, and anywhere where you see metal to metal parts, moving parts. And in the hook assembly, some right below the bobbin case there, if you rotate the wheel, you'll see there are some little notches here. Those are oil holding reservoirs. And when you put oil there, it will go into those notches and retain it there for a period of time. On this gear down below. And that's pretty much most of the spots that you need to worry about oil. You should oil the machine once before a major project. Anytime you're going to put it away for an extended period of time, or if you have had it put away for an extended period of time and you're getting ready to sew. Again. There are really 2 stages to timing. The first is setting the needle bar height, and then the second is setting the rotation of the hook. To set the needle bar height on a Sailmaker, you want the machine set to straight stitch, and then you rotate the flywheel until the needle bar is at the very bottom of its travel. You know it's at the bottom of its travel when you reach that point where it's in transition between down or up, depending upon which way you turn the flywheel. Okay, we're at the very bottom there. Another way to determine if you're at the bottom of its travel is there is another arm to the right of the needle bar, and when it is perfectly vertical, the needle bar is at the bottom of its travel. There is a cutout here in a plate that allows access to a set screw in a clamp assembly. That clamp is the clamp that controls the height of the needle bar. Needle bar being the bar that the needle is inserted into. With the bobbin case in place, you would release the set screw and then gently allow the needle bar to drop until it hits metal, and the metal that it's hitting is the shelf of the bobbin case. Now, I'd either want to drop my presser foot or have my presser foot off in order to make sure that it drops all the way down. It would be best to have it off. Once I hit that metal surface, then I want to raise this presser bar assembly slightly. Now, the amount that it's raised is not that critical, but I like to see at least a 1/16 of an inch of height above the shelf of the bobbin case, which is where the point of the needle will be resting when it's at the very bottom. Raise it, and then make sure that this screw is facing directly off to the right, and then with your screwdriver, you are going to tighten the clamp to hold that position. Now, to verify that everything's okay, go ahead and turn the machine over and straight stitch. Make sure that you don't hear any noise like the needle hitting anything metal, and go to zigzag. Make sure that you don't hear any metal-to-metal noises either. If you do hear a metal-to-metal noise, and if it is hitting the shelf, what you can do is tilt the machine back, and you can usually, in zigzag, see the needle come down into the bobbin case and actually tap the shelf on whichever side it's hitting. If it is tapping the shelf, the needle bar is not high enough. You need to reposition it a little bit further up. Once the needle bar height is set, then it's a matter of setting the rotation of the hook. Rotation of the hook on a Sailmaker is set by moving the mechanism into maximum zigzag. It must be in maximum zigzag. Again, that means moving the lever over here on the right down to the 12 position and locking it in place. Oops. Okay. Now, when it's locked in place, the needle bar will move left and right. What we want is the needle bar to come down on the left side, and then as it starts to come back up when we're turning the flywheel, we watch for the hook to cross behind the needle. The hook is a very sharp point on the shuttle assembly, right there. Now, it almost looks like scissors. There's another, what appears to be a hook below it, but that one is dull. It is not sharp, and this is very sharp, needle sharp. The only one that's important is the one that is needle sharp. That's the hook that picks up the thread to create the stitch. So what we want to do is go back to the left side and get roughly in the position where the hook is right at the back side of the needle. In that position, we're going to get down under the shuttle assembly, and we'll notice that there is a set screw that faces pretty much straight down, or in this case, right there. We don't want to loosen that set screw. We leave it tight. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the flywheel a little bit, come to the first set screw, loosen it. Rotate it a little further, come to the second set screw, loosen it. We don't want to loosen any more at this point. Now we go back to the timing position, and the one set screw of the three that won't be loose is the one that's facing straight down. What this does is gives us the ability to loosen that set screw while we gently adjust. So we might be loosening it like this and using our thumb while we gently adjust the rotation of the hook or the up and down position of the hook. What we want is when that needle is coming back up, we want the hook to come around And if you think in terms of the hook as being sort of a football at the end, in other words, the sharp point is one end of the football, we want that point to be in line with, let's think of the eye of the needle as a football, and the top of the eye of the needle being where we pass the thread through. The top of the eye of the needle, think of it as an end of the football. We want one end to match up with the other end. When the two ends are contacting one another, the rotational timing is set properly. We don't adjust the needle bar height because we've already done that to affect the timing. What we're adjusting is we're adjusting now the rotation, or the counterclockwise, clockwise position of the hook in order to get that positioning. Now, the positioning is also affected up and down, and what we want is we want that hook point to be right at the back side of the needle. We don't want it to be deflecting the needle forward, but we want it to be basically brushing the back side of the needle. So when you're doing timing, you not only have to sort of look in from this direction, again, best done with the foot and the feed dog removed, but you also have to look in from this direction or this direction to make sure that the this direction, to make sure that the needle is not being deflected out of the way by the hook, and conversely that the needle is not too far away from the hook, or the hook isn't too far away from the needle, I should say, in which case you would have all kinds of skip stitches. Now, once you have it positioned where you think it should be, snug this screw, but don't snug the other two yet. Rotate it through, because sometimes you get a little different perspective of the way it looks when you come back to look at it again. Rotate it through, get back into the timing position, look at it. If it looks good, tighten the other two screws and you're ready to go. Then you put the whole assembly back together, and when you have it back together, you want to do some test sewing. In straight stitch, you'll probably always be fine. But timing is one of those things where you never really get it the first time. You may have to make a few adjustments before you have it just right. The best way to check the timing is to go to maximum zigzag, 12mm stitch, and sew in 6 to 8 layers of sunbrella, and check to see if you're dropping a stitch in either zigzag or straight stitch, but zigzag is where you're going to notice it most readily. If you're dropping a stitch, and I don't have any examples of that here because this machine's perfectly adjusted, but let's just hypothetically say this point didn't exist, and instead there was a straight stitch running from here to here, and no point here. Now what that would be, the needle still comes down here, but it's not creating a locked stitch at this point, so that's what we call a skip on the right, if the material were coming out of the machine like this. If the machine skips on the right, that means that your hook probably needs to be rotated clockwise. Clockwise adjustments affect the timing such that it's easier for the machine to pick up the stitch on the right hand side. If the opposite occurs and you have more of what looks to be a straight stitch on the right side over here, that means you're skipping on the left. No stitch would be produced here, no lock would be produced here. That means left skip means rotate the hook counterclockwise. So it's pretty easy to think of. Left counterclockwise, right is clockwise. And you can make fine-tuning adjustments just based upon what type of a problem is occurring. If you're skipping on both sides, then you may have the issue where the hook is too far away from the needle, in which case you need to move the hook up in order to get it closer to the back side of the needle. And those are really the tricks to timing, and that should be all that you really need to know. You just need to play with it and make those adjustments as necessary. Eventually you'll have it right on the money. If your bobbin isn't filling full enough, or is overfilling, it can be adjusted. There is a screw on the back side of the cover plate, which once removed allows you to pull this plate off. With this plate in hand, you can see how it operates. Pushing the lever in pushes this wheel out, which engages against the flywheel. Okay? Now, there is a silver component here that has a little score line on it, where this lever hits the line. If the lever is positioned toward me from the center line, the bobbin will fill so that it is more full. If the lever hits this assembly so that it is on the far side of that line, the bobbin will not fill as full. So the trick with bobbin winding is to get the lever positioned against this edge relative to that little score mark so that you get a perfect bobbin fill. To adjust it, what you would do is release the bobbin winder mechanism by releasing the lever first, and then you would use a small screwdriver to loosen the small set screw here. Now you'll use the lever to push it back into position or on. Now there's one other screw that locks this in place. You will loosen this screw. Now you can turn, you got to make sure you hold the lever on. Now you can turn this assembly in order to affect how full the bobbin wind is. Once you have it positioned where you want it, you tighten the screws. This one first, you just do it in reverse. And this one last. And that's all there is to making adjustment to how much the bobbin fills. Another adjustment that you might need to make at some point down the road would be changing the height of the presser foot. And if you trace the presser foot bar up into the machine, you'll see again there's another clamp with a 3mm Allen headed set screw. Releasing the set screw allows you to move the bar up and down. Whenever you make adjustments to the bar, which we generally don't recommend, but when you do make it, if you do make an adjustment to the bar, you always want to make sure that when you drop the presser foot, it comes down in complete contact with the throat plate. And if you raise it, you don't want to raise it so high that when the needle bar is at the bottom of its travel that it crashes into the foot.